Hello everyone, I'm Tracy Matisak and I'm here with Wendy Sachs. Wendy is the author of Fearless and Free, How Smart Women Pivot and Relaunch Their Careers. And you might say that Wendy knows a thing or two about the career pivot. She has been an Emmy Award-winning producer, a Capitol Hill press secretary, a PR executive, a frequent contributor to publications, radio, and TV shows that talk about work-life balance. And now in her latest book, Wendy is really urging women to step up and reposition themselves for the disruptive technologies and hustle and grit that we see today. And to do that by following the example of many women who have done exactly that. Wendy, welcome to Skillsoft Off the Shelf.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell me, what compelled you to write this book?
You know, as a writer, I feel like we often write about what we know, and in my case, I like to write about what I don't know. And Fearless and Free is very much a sort of a personal journey for me. While it's not a memoir, it comes out of personal experience. I had been fired. I lost my job, and I was struggling and panicking with what I was going to do next. Because the industries that I've worked in media and in publishing, advertising, those industries have been disrupted by digital over the past 5 years and definitely the past 10 years. And as an over 40 woman going in to apply for a new job, I realized that I was competing with millennials. I was being interviewed by people who were 10, 15 years younger than me, and I wasn't connecting with them. I wasn't selling my story, and I wasn't getting the jobs that, frankly, I was really qualified for.
So you probably knew if it was happening to you, it was happening to a lot of other women as well.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And there's so much fear that holds women back. We can feel so stuck for women who lose their job because, by the way, so many people have lost their jobs through reorganizations, from companies folding, certain industries just completely shifting or transforming because of what's happening with technology. And so many of these industries are the ones that women are in. Marketing and, again, media and publishing and advertising, writing. Newspapers have died, magazines have folded. So what are we supposed to do? We need to be able to figure it out and stay relevant to the jobs that are emerging today.
You suggest in the book that women who, for whatever reason, find themselves stuck can benefit from the startup playbook, from taking a page out of their book. What do you mean by that?
Well, so I'm sort of fascinated with Silicon Valley and that whole startup spirit. And of course, Silicon Valley to me is really our North Star today, right? It's directing everything we do, from how we date to how we communicate and where we get our news and our entertainment, how we socialize to how we find jobs. Everything is coming from technology. And I was also really fascinated by this whole idea of that failure fetish that comes out of Silicon Valley. So you have all the boys in the hoodies, and their companies are blowing up, and they're burning through millions of dollars in venture capital cash. But these guys are not going and hiding under a rock. They're not feeling sorry for themselves. No, these guys are rewarded. They're given other jobs, or they simply pivot in their business, right? So that idea of, oh, it's not working, let's just pivot. It's not me. It's sort of something external. Right? That's where I thought, well, this is what women need to be doing for themselves. What are these other successful lessons coming out of Silicon Valley and that startup world that we can apply to ourselves? And that's really how I started writing the book and looking for different themes. So it's embracing failure. It's how we brand ourselves. It's how we network. Women don't necessarily like to network so much. So there's a whole bunch of different themes that emerged as I was looking at Silicon Valley. And by the way, this is not about being in technology. This is not about being, someone who wants to work at a startup. These are lessons and universal themes that can apply to all of us.
You also brought up an interesting point when you said that men tend to externalize the problem and women internalize and think, well, something must be wrong with me. Why do we do that?
I think it's that we agonize so much. We really overthink. And in that overthinking, we can create real anxiety. We replay the tape over and over again if we don't get the job or something goes wrong. And if I always do this with my husband. Now, this is not pure science. This is my own anecdotal experience. But I'll ask my husband the same thing. I didn't get that email back, or I wrote to someone, or I called someone. I haven't heard back. Then I start thinking, oh my God, maybe they hate me, right? Maybe they remember remembered me and I wasn't like as good as I thought I was, and maybe I did something wrong, and I started like replaying the tape, what would happen in that conversation, that meeting, that interview. For my husband, he thinks, well, they're just really busy. That's why you haven't heard back. Get over it. Like, let it go, right? But we overthink, and we create so much internal panic and make something out of nothing so often. And there definitely is a gender difference between the way that men and women sort of, relate and think about these types of things. There's sort of no doubt about that. So if we can take a step back, if we can, create sort of a method for us to not worry as much and not think that it's us, I think it's a very healthy way to approach it.
There's also an interesting, I think it was a Hewlett-Packard study that talked about how women will not apply for a job unless they believe they meet 100% of the criteria. Right. Men, if they meet 60%, they're applying for the job. Right. Yes. Same kind of idea, right?
Yes. This study, I mentioned in my book, it's been cited by everyone from Sheryl Sandberg and Lean In to sort of, everyone really clings on to this study because it's fascinating, right? I mean, is that really true? Do women really need to feel 100% qualified? Whatever this may be, it's certainly telling that we don't want to take a chance or put ourselves out there unless we feel 100% ready, right? So men will say, hey, I got some of these things going on. Sure, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. I'll apply for that promotion or that job or that opportunity. I'm good enough. And you hear this constantly when it comes to negotiation for pay raises, the way that a man will walk in to the office to see his boss to ask for that raise, or even before he starts the job, right, in that pre-negotiation stage of getting hired. Men ask for more money up front. Men say that they're worth it, where women, this is not my personal opinion, there are so mountains of research that support this, but we tend to underestimate our value. But I'll tell you what we're really good at. We're really good at advocating for other people who work for us. We're really, really good champions for our team, for our friends. If our friend calls us up and says, what should I do? You're never going to tell your friend to take the first offer. You're never going to tell your friend not to go in and ask for that raise. So some of the techniques I learned when I was researching the book is, if we get into the headspace of pretending we're giving advice to someone else, or that we're trying to get a raise for someone on our team, and think about it that way and take ourselves out of it a little bit, becomes a little less personal. We can become a little bit less squeamish about asking for the money. You write in the book that women tend to struggle with a Barbie problem. What's our Barbie problem? Well, the Barbie doll problem, of course, we all know that Barbie is just like way too perfect. And so there was something very interesting that was happening with Barbie. There was a book that came out, I can't remember how many years ago, but recently in the past 5 years or so. And the way that it was written, this was Barbie the computer programmer. And Barbie couldn't figure out how to fix her computer. Well, that's sort of ridiculous. And so she had to call her friends to help her out, and they were the guys. The guys could fix her computer to make sure that she didn't lose all of her files and all of her photos, and Barbie was just drawing the cute pictures of the puppies. And there became this outrage online on the internet when people saw what the story was all about. So a woman whose name I'm forgetting, she actually put something up online to say we need to rewrite this storyline, and people did. They started submitting their suggestions for how we rewrite the story. P.S. The Barbie book gets pulled from Amazon. I think it was ABC who actually owned the rights to then some other storyline. They pulled it off the shelves as well. And again, it just feeds into that narrative that women need help, that women in technology need help, that women can't be engineers. It's really sort of feeding into the worst ideas of how girls feel about themselves, and our ideas as a culture of what women can create and can do. There are many people who feel that as little girls, we have a high degree of confidence, and then as we get older, over the course of time, that confidence tends to diminish. What do you think causes that? Oh, that's such a great question. I think it's real life experience. I truly think that, girls start out so strong. All these girls are on the soccer field. I was watching in my town, there is flag football, and there's a bunch of girls playing flag football, and I thought, that's fantastic, flag football. Girls on baseball teams even. And then, they hit those middle school years, and I've seen it with my own daughter. and they start just doubting themselves. It's about fitting in. It's about being good enough and pretty enough. And I will tell you, I think that Instagram and social media is the worst possible thing that could be happening to girls today, because the comparisons and all of these girls in their bikini shots, and they're 12 years old and 13 and 14, and the idealizing of what a body image is. I mean, it's just compounding the problem.
Hard enough to be a teenager as it is.
I think it's really hard. And the older that we get, the harder it is to take risks. So, people get settled, they feel complacent in their jobs and whatever they're doing in their lives, and it's hard to really shake it up. And so my advice to everyone is fail. The best way to, build your confidence and to take risks is to be okay and comfortable with failure.
I want to pivot a little bit, to use your word. One of the experts that you quoted in the book says that there's no such thing as a career path anymore, that it's really all about being relevant. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. And I'm going to add, aside from being relevant, I really took it a step further to say that we need to all think of ourselves as entrepreneurs, even if we're not running our own businesses, but to think of ourselves and our career as in a very entrepreneurial way. So we are making things happen for ourselves. We are branding and positioning ourselves. And we're being aware of all the skill sets out there that maybe we don't have yet, but that we need to acquire. Because the path is like this now. It's zigzagging all over the place. And back to even, what we started with, industries are changing so quickly. You had mentioned in the intro that I do a lot of talking on work-life balance. So I had written a book about work-life balance a dozen years ago. And when I wrote that first book, I interviewed all these professional women. People worked in media, and there's some famous people, some famous politicians and people in media, and then regular people, attorneys and teachers. Not one of those women worked in social media, because there was no social media a dozen years ago. No one worked for an app company. There were no apps. Mark Zuckerberg was still in school. So the world has changed so much, we don't even know what these job titles mean anymore. So yeah, there is no linear path. There's so much change, and we need to be comfortable with that change and be on the lookout for it to see where things are moving and to be really okay with all of that.
And along those lines, you say in the book, job hopping is the new normal, and that agility is the must-have skill. Now, we talk about organizations needing to be agile, but what does it mean for an individual to develop their agility?
So I think it's a mindset. I think it's to know, it's that whole Sally Dweck is this very, well-known researcher and professor, and she wrote this book all about this growth mindset versus fixed mindset, which became very popular in parenting circles, of course. And the whole concept is like, don't just tell your kid they're smart because, if they're good, or you say you're good at math, and then all of a sudden they hit middle school and they're no longer getting A's in math. They think, oh, I guess I'm not so good at math. You're supposed to praise the journey and the experience. So in that mindset, it's about where you're going. It's not about being good, which feels very fixed. It's like, I'm a good writer. It's about, how you're developing as a writer. So it's getting into that headspace of a growth mindset, that everything we pretty much need to know, I truly believe you can learn online. I truly believe you can Google everything you need to know. You can watch a YouTube video. Aside from becoming, a NASA astronaut or a brain surgeon or something where you need really specific training, so many other professions today you can learn online. And the internet has democratized so much, so you can try things out. Anyone can say that they're a writer. Go publish. There are platforms to publish on. Anyone could say they're a graphic artist. Design and put it up there. And I mean, the list really goes on and on with all the places that you can test out your skill sets.
You write about some of the language traps that women tend to fall into. What are some of those traps?
Well, first of all, let's start out with the apology. The whole I'm sorry, which became very, I want to say, sort of linguistically trendy over the past few years, where it started out as almost like a British saying and British expression, which I think it still exists and is, in full action in the UK, which sorry, a lot of apologizing. And when we apologize, we are just diminishing our power. And by the way, I started doing this too. In my own sort of writing of the book, I talk about how I was told from one of my bosses that I came off as very abrasive and not warm enough. And she knew I was warm because she would see me in person and I was smiley and all of that. But because I was working virtually and so much of my communication was on the phone or just through emails with colleagues of mine, they thought I came across as abrasive. Now, by the way, that is a word that's often used sort of against women, particularly in their studies that show this at tech companies, and I happen to be at a tech company. But my feelings were really hurt. I felt terrible, where I thought I was just being direct. I didn't mean to be bitchy, but that's how I was coming across, and that really hurt my feelings. And one of my colleagues at the time, who was a good friend of mine too, she just was in the habit of saying sorry all the time. And no one thought she was too abrasive. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to adopt that whole sorry thing because it seems to be working so well for her. And I went to a different company. And wherever I went, I was just sorry, opening up a door, sorry. It was like a filler. It was just this I was sort of, just dropping it in. So no one thought I was being abrasive or too direct because I wasn't. I was hedging all of the time. Interestingly, at this time, Pantene came out with this ad that was spoofing sorry. And there was all of these different scenes where you saw this woman in her kitchen and a man who looks like it's her husband or a partner or a boyfriend. She's handing a baby over saying sorry. And then there's a woman on the subway and a guy is, big, his legs are stretched out and she's hunched over and she's apologizing. And then there's a woman walking into a conference room, same thing, sorry. So now I'm done with saying sorry. I'm realizing this is not such a good idea. And Amy Schumer did a spoof on sorry. There's a bunch of things, sort of why are women apologizing all of the time? But then there's these other words that are called these shrinker words, the justs and the actuallys and the am I making sense? And again, it's ways that women drop it into conversation or into an email, and we think we're just trying to be breezy and we're just trying to maybe soften our tone because we don't want to come across as too direct. But what's happening is we really are inadvertently taking away our power.
Well, and the other challenge that women face is that you want to be assertive, but you can be perceived as aggressive.
Right.
Or maybe what
Yes.
for a man is labeled assertive, for a woman is labeled aggressive. And so what can you say to women who are sort of struggling with how to be appropriately assertive and not be seen as something more than that?
This is, of course, the double bind that women in leadership, face. To smile. My advice is smile. Smile and body language. Now, that didn't work for me when I was having this virtual connection with my colleagues, but it does work really well in person. So when you are in person, to be smiley and to show body language that just evokes sort of a more friendly demeanor. When you're going into a meeting, big smile, be friendly, start warm. Maybe you're talking about the Yankees lost, or you're talking about the weather, or whatever it is, you're making a connection to their children. Then be direct in the meeting, be as authentic to yourself as you want to be, and then close in a warm way. And I would say the same thing holds with email correspondence. Start warm, be direct, and warm. But scrub your communication for all of those shrinker words. Take them out. Really take them out.
I want to talk a little bit more about body language since you brought that up, because that's something you write about in the book as well, and really how critical that is. We don't tend to think about that so much, but it really is powerful.
I'm thinking about it right now. I'm thinking, am I hunching too forward? Yeah, I think we really do need to be conscientious about how we're presenting. And, there's a lot of research out there on how women are perceived versus a man. In my book, I talk also a lot about the 2016 presidential election and, Hillary Clinton, and we're not even talking about, Republican versus Democrat or being partisan, but just a man as opposed to a woman. And you can just see that there's so much differentiation with how the perception is. But I do think that women, we need to present big and tall and and powerful. And sometimes for women, that means, they're putting on a leather jacket, you feel a little bit tougher, right? You just feel better. So whatever that look is for you, whatever you need to do to create your own mojo, whether that's before going into a meeting or an interview, you're standing in front of a mirror and you are giving yourself whatever mental pep talk you need to do, or you're putting on the coat of lipstick that makes you feel really strong and bold and brave. We need to do that for ourselves, because this timid, meek, closing ourselves down, not standing tall, not having a strong handshake, that really does represent us in a negative way.
I'm thinking, Wendy, about young women who are just entering the workforce, and that can be a scary transitional time, full of fear for some. Yeah. What do you say to young women who are beginning their careers about how to be fearless?
Oh, I love that question, because this is what I talk to my daughter about all the time, although she's not entering the workforce. To really be authentic to themselves and to not be afraid of using their voice. I think the most powerful advice we can give our daughters or our sisters or nieces or our friends' children to these young girls coming up through the ranks is to really be strong and to develop a sisterhood among themselves within their, at their workplace or within their industry. A supportive sisterhood, I've found, is incredibly important to lifting everyone together and to feeling like someone's got your back, to not feel like you're in it alone. And I do have to say that is probably what I've seen over all of my years out here, because I'm not so young anymore. But I've seen a huge transition between Gen Xers, which is what I am, and the millennials coming up through the ranks, where there is a sisterhood today that didn't exist when I had my first job on Capitol Hill. There's no doubt about it. There's more of a sense that we're raising each other together.
You write about how women should engineer their own serendipity. Mm-hmm. What does that mean, and how do we do it?
So I love serendipity, and I think that so many of us think of serendipity as just a happy accident, right? Like, oh, that person's really lucky, or like great fortune. We might look around and think, why are they so lucky? But actually, when I started probing into serendipity, I saw that it had these connections also to technology in Silicon Valley and to the whole startup creative world, where serendipity can be engineered. It actually can be manufactured. We create these moments for ourselves. And so what that means, as when it comes to like an individual, is how do we put ourselves into places where we're creating opportunities for ourselves, and then we're ready to seize on the opportunity. So it's partly creating some visibility for yourself, being seen in the right places, and then making a move. And I'll give you a better example, because I know that sounds incredibly vague and super unhelpful. So there is a woman who is in my book. Her name is Meredith Sinclair. And she started out as she was a school teacher who decided to stay at home with her two boys when they were born. She wanted to be an at-home mom. She lived in Chicago. And she started doing some blogging on the side. And she'd just share it with her friends and family and, talking about the sort of mundane reality of being a mom of toddlers. Well, she was at the one of the public libraries one day, and she saw that Chicago Parent Magazine was looking for a blogger. So she applied. She thought, great, someone will actually pay me to do what I'm doing. Well, about a year into that, she thought, I've always really wanted to be on television. I did something in Pittsburgh, and it was for public television, and I loved it. And, Chicago Magazine, Parent Magazine, they don't have anyone on television. What if I could be the local person going on TV? So she approached the magazine. They said, that sounds great. She went to a local TV station in Chicago. I can't remember which one. They said, great. So for 5 years, she was waking up at 5 a.m. every, so often when they let her come on down to the studio, and she would talk about children and play, and she had her own niche that she was building for herself. A few years after that, she starts going to these mom blogging conferences because it's becoming a big thing. And at one of these conferences, some producers from the Today Show are there. So she said, I really want to be on the Today Show. Well, everyone wants to be on the Today Show. Everyone thinks that they can be an on-air person on the Today Show. But she finally got enough courage. She went up to these Today Show producers at the final cocktail party of the conference, and she said, you don't have anyone talking about play on the Today Show. I'm sort of the expert on play, and I want to pitch you some stories. So they thought, sure, whatever, here's our email address. Well, she pitched her stories, and I tell you that 3 weeks later, she had her first appearance on the Today Show. But she had put herself She'd created the opportunity for herself. Now, she'd also laid the groundwork to make this happen. So it wasn't just lucky that it happened. She had built experience over time, right? The culmination of experience. She put herself in the conference. She went to wherever, Utah, where they were doing the conference. She then went up to the Today Show producers. She followed up with them, but she also now had a little sizzle reel that she could send along from Chicago. So it showed some legitimacy. So was she just lucky? Was it just an accident? No, she had created that serendipity for herself.
She was the overnight sensation, years in the making.
That's exactly right. And I think that so many of us don't know that we don't understand that. We don't understand how long it can take to build and develop. We see, especially because of social these days, it seems like instant success, right? And we can become sort of envious, have that Facebook envy of, oh my gosh, look at all these great things happening for these people I went to high school with or college with, and how did that happen? How did she get a book deal? Or how did, she has this business. What did she, she's, selling at Whole Foods. How did these things happen? And you don't realize that things are a slow build, but you can create the opportunity for yourself. And I think that's actually really empowering to know that it's not just luck, but you can actually make that luck happen.
And in addition to serendipity, of course, there is the idea of reinventing oneself. And you spotlight a woman named Deb, I believe, in your book, who is like the poster child for reinventing oneself. Can you tell us a little bit about her story?
Oh, wow. She's had an incredible story. So I actually met her when I worked at Dateline NBC. She had been a war photographer after she went to Harvard, and she was a war photographer correspondent in the Middle East and all around. She had done that for several years, and she came over to Dateline NBC, and she was a producer there and had children and realized that was not compatible with work-life balance. She'd written some books. So she kept having to pivot and pivot and pivot. She also got fired a bunch of times. Similar to my story, I lost my job. She got fired a whole bunch of times. And she realized that she needed to continue switching things up. I mean, she said to me, I think it was in 2016, she had 6 jobs. I mean, it was sort of amazing to me. So part of this whole idea of this gig economy, which has been so celebrated, like, oh, look at all the freedom we all have. We can all be an Uber driver, or we can all be like hustling our own little business on the side. We also don't realize how incredibly exhausting that can be. So I want to sort of take all of the shine off of that whole idea that it's all fabulous if we're working 6 jobs. That's actually very exhausting. But on the other side, she's doing amazing things. So while she had those 6 jobs, she was also writing for the TV show Younger. She had a corporate executive job. She was still shooting pictures, and she's still writing, and she's still doing these amazing, she's creating amazing work. But she also has that drive and that spirit to make that happen. Now, not everyone has all of that. Not everyone wants to work 6 jobs. Let's be clear about that. But the idea that there is opportunity, she's 50 years old, and she keeps reinventing, to me is just very inspiring.
You've mentioned the importance of branding, and one of the challenges that I think many women have is that they see branding as bragging and are maybe reluctant to do that. So I wonder if you can give us something that perhaps women could start doing right away to begin that branding process.
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the first place everyone should be. Anyone who's looking for a job, which I'm assuming that your audience is, that's the first place to go. And I will tell you, I've spent a lot of time at LinkedIn, and I realized there's a lot of LinkedIn hacks that I figured out for myself. We have to really start with repositioning ourselves and making sure that the language that we're presenting to the world is language that's consistent with what the jobs are that we're looking for. So, by the way, I've never worked in marketing before. I never thought of myself as a marketer. But now I've realized that all the jobs that I ever look for, marketing is basically what they're calling what I do. So it's redefining what our skill set is to match the language of what the market is putting out there and what is being hired for. So LinkedIn is the first place, and you want other people to know what it is that you do well. We can't be squeamish. If we're not sharing our story and telling people, like, as the kids say, what their superpower is, if you're not sharing that with the world, no one's going to do it for you.
Well, Wendy, I want to thank you. You have given us a really powerful way to think about how to reinvent ourselves and how to step forward, and you've given us some really great practical examples as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
The book is called Fearless and Free. We invite you to check it out and add it to your Skillsoft playlist. Thanks for watching.